there, it's Silver. This is Enshrouded. So I've been taking a look at this for a little bit now, just to sort of get used to it and everything, and I think I'm finally ready to show it off and talk about it, because there's actually quite a lot here. Despite it being new into its early access phase, it launched with a pretty significant amount of content and a lot of stuff to do. This is a survival game, but it is kind of unusual in a lot of its mechanics, mostly because it's not just a survival game, it's more like an action RPG with survival elements. So it's got a lot more significant RPG mechanics and stuff than your average survival game tends to. So if you enjoyed something like, say, Valheim, then this is probably going to be up your alley. So the way that it works is, as you would expect, you are plopped down in a pretty large world and told to survive. But there's a lot more of a story focus going on here due to the whole action RPG focus kind of thing. So there is a narrative to actually follow, and there's some lore as to who you are. You are a sort of unique type of person called a Flameborn, and you have some odd characteristics in regards to the world around you. One of those things is that even though this is a survival game, you actually don't have to eat or drink in order to survive. There are no hunger and thirst bars, and I actually really like this, even though I do think that there are plenty of survival games that make hunger and thirst work, and they work really well within the context of that particular game. I also very much like the idea of playing a survival-focused game that doesn't necessarily use that in the traditional sense, and this is one of those. Now, you can eat and drink, you just don't have to live, but you do actually want to, because you do get some pretty significant benefits from food and drink. Things like water will improve your maximum stamina and also improve the rate at which your stamina regenerates, which is a big deal because by default it's actually quite slow. And things like food will give you various stat buffs for a long period of time, and because this is an RPG, stats are pretty important, so you actually do want that. And at first you'll simply be exploring this world, and you'll be told to place down a flame altar. A flame altar is the sort of heart of your base, and this is where one of the larger differences between a lot of survival games happens. You can only build wherever you set a flame altar, but you can set them pretty much anywhere. As long as there's enough like sort of flat ground around it and there are no enemies or anything, you can plop one of these down. You can actually craft them very easily with just a few stone, and once they're set down, it'll give you a nice big radius that you can build around. And you can feed the flame with some stuff that you'll find, some materials you'll find from exploration, and doing this will actually expand the area so you can get a larger and larger area of your base. You can also eventually upgrade the flame, which will give you some various benefits like some skill points and some stat increases and stuff, but also it'll allow you to build more than one base, so you can actually have several of these flame altars around the world. This is important because this game actually does have fast travel, and you can fast travel to any of these towers that you find to unlock, as well as any of your altars, your bases that you've placed. So it's actually a viable idea to not necessarily build a whole bunch at every single one, but to at least place them around the world in various advantageous spots so that you can actually have a bit of a fast travel network going on. So this is one of the big reasons why you might want to upgrade your flame to have more altars placed. This way you can have more fast travel points active in the world at once. And at this point, once you have made a bit of a base for yourself, you'll start to get some objectives, and this is where one of the other really big differences comes in that actually I really like. It's one of my favorite features of the game so far. There are NPCs that you will have to find, and this works kind of like Terraria of all games, where you'll be tasked to find an NPC. You'll have to go to a specific place in the world where this NPC will be sort of hidden, usually a sort of a tomb, basically, and you're kind of reviving them. And you will eventually find them, and you'll craft this staff that allows you to summon them, and you can summon them wherever you want within your base. And in order to get all the advantages for having this NPC at your base, you have to actually build them a shelter. You need to shelter them. So, like I said, that's kind of like Terraria, where you have to build individual shelters for each of the NPCs, and some of them want specific things. Like the alchemists might want a giant mortar, for instance, and providing them with this will not only make their home look a little cooler and more alchemy-like, but it'll also expand their repertoire of what they can craft to some greater potions and things. So this means that your progression is based half around the stuff that you can make and half around the stuff that your NPCs can make, because of course this is a survival game, so there's a lot of crafting involved, but the stuff that you can craft at first is pretty basic. You just have a basic workbench, and you can craft some basic building blocks and things at this workbench, as well as some super basic tools to help you get started. And if you want anything more advanced than that, then you've got to rescue people like a blacksmith that allows you to craft better weapons, and eventually they will give you the stations to make things like metal, so you can make metal armor and weapons. Or perhaps you could rescue a hunter and have them at your base, and they will give you access to some stuff that allows you to tan leather and make hides into much better armor than you normally could, and stuff like that. So this means that there's a sort of like a multi-tier system around what you can craft. There's the really basic stuff that you can craft by default, and then there's the stuff that you get for rescuing an NPC, and then there's the stuff that you get for crafting the new stations that the NPC can teach you to make, and then there's the stuff that you can get for improving the NPC's house and expanding their arsenal from there. So there's like a bunch of different layers of stuff, and this is how your main progression actually works. You'll also notice from early on that there's some progression around how you can traverse the world that you'll need to unlock as well. At first you'll only have a little bit of the world unlocked, not because there's something preventing you from moving, like something like a hard wall, but more just because the farther areas will need some tools that you don't have yet. So you can eventually unlock things like a glider, so you can glide around from high areas. You can unlock a grappling hook, and of course you can level up, which will make you stronger and able to traverse the other areas a little more effectively, because this game does have a level system. You gain experience from doing just about everything, from killing enemies to mining ores and crafting stuff, and when you level up you will gain a skill point, or multiple usually. And the skill tree is pretty cool because it's extensive and also has a lot of really interesting stuff in it. There's pretty much, aside from the basic like stat improvement nodes, you know, like +1 strength, there's pretty much nothing boring about the skill tree. Basically anything that costs multiple skill points is going to be something really interesting. And you're going to get stuff like the ability to double jump, for instance, is one of them. Or the ability to do big heavy finishing attacks with your weapons, for instance. So pretty much all of them are like major mechanical improvements and stuff, which is nice because that means it's exciting to earn skill points. And then you've of course got to worry about the game's namesake itself, which is the Shroud. So as you're exploring around, you'll notice that the areas that you can walk around are sort of like plateaus of grassy field and stuff that are up above the rest of the world. And if you look down into these ravines and stuff, you'll notice this blue smog covering everything. And this is the Shroud. When you walk into the Shroud, a 5-minute timer by default will start, and you gotta keep an eye on that, a very close eye on it, because if it ever runs out, you're pretty much instantly dead. So you need to get out of the Shroud in order to actually refill this timer. But while you're in the Shroud, there's a lot of stuff to find and do. As you would expect from such a dangerous place, there's a lot of loot and stuff that you can find while you're here, and there are even some resources that you can only gather while you're in the Shroud. So you will need to go into the Shroud at various points in the game and try to survive. The various bits of new places to explore will also often be separated by parts where you have to traverse the Shroud to get there. And there are also some NPCs that you need to rescue that are within the Shroud. While you're in it, you will sometimes find these flames. These act as checkpoints, and you can revive at them when you die if you visited them last, but they also restore your timer while you're hanging out near them, so you can use them as like little safe zones for a minute before you go back in. And there's plenty of stuff to find while you're here. You'll also sometimes come across red Shroud or red ground in the Shroud. This is a big problem and you've got to stay away from it because this is lethal Shroud. And if you touch this stuff at all, it will sap your time like several minutes per second. And if you stay in it for more than a few seconds, you'll die instantly, so you've got to be super careful about that. But as you level up your base, your flames, you can actually both spend more time in the Shroud. This is how you up that 5 minutes to a greater time. And also it will allow you to traverse higher levels of the Shroud without being immediately killed. There are also loads of Shroud exclusive enemies, which are usually these sort of infected / undead humans with various different tools and things. They're not just like dumb zombies, they actually can use weapons and stuff against you, and some of them are really strong. So you do have to be careful about that, and they also tend to spawn in really large numbers in some areas, especially around the Elixir Wells. The Elixir Wells are places that you will eventually have to go for story reasons that are part of the reason why the world is the way that it is. And these are basically like a form of dungeon. When you find them around the world, you can usually see them by these big metal gates that are hanging over them. And they'll be surrounded by a lot of enemies, and they'll go sort of deep within the earth into caves and stuff. Usually also the underground area is within the Shroud too, so you do have to be careful about that. But at the bottom of the well, usually you'll find this thing called a shroud root, which is like a big red writhing plant thing. Now, oftentimes there's also a guardian. Either there'll be just a bunch of enemy spawns, or there'll be an actual boss enemy around the root that you have to dispatch first. But once you're able to actually get to it safely, you can chop it down with an axe, and by doing so you will actually remove some of the Shroud and the surrounding area, making it safe again, and you'll also get some skill points and stuff for your troubles. You definitely want to be finding these whenever you can. Sometimes you'll even come across roots that are not in wells. They'll just be sort of around the environment in various places. These are often important for clearing out large pockets of the Shroud to allow you to actually traverse to certain areas or between certain areas of safe ground a little bit easier. You'll also find lots of other dungeon types that you can crawl into, which is pretty cool. You'll find various small tombs with some really good loot at the end, and they're usually full of undead. And you'll also find some larger tombs with a lot more involved areas that are significantly larger and also have some puzzle solving and stuff to do, so that's neat. And you'll find other types of just points of interest in general while you're exploring. The game does a really good job, actually, of filling the world with a lot of stuff to find and do. So you'll find abandoned villages, old ruins and tombs and all sorts of things like that, and you'll be able to just go in any of them whenever you want. You can just sort of explore at your own leisure, and they're usually all worth exploring thoroughly because you'll find not only some good materials and some good loot, you can find some new weapons or maybe some spells and things like that to use, but you can also often find some bits of side quests and stuff to do. There are a surprising number of side quests in the game, some of which you'll find just from reading notes and journal entries and things that you find around the place. They'll give you a little bit of extra lore, some background info on the area, and also they'll point you to the location of a buried treasure or the location of a cache in the back of a cave or something like that, and give you some extra dungeon crawling to do for some better loot. The combat, I would say, is pretty solid. It is relatively simple, but it does its job well. You've got a basic swing combo, and they're different for each different kind of weapon. So you've got, your really heavy, slow, swinging giant maces and stuff, or your nice short swords that you can actually use along with the shield or something like that. You've also got some other moves that you can unlock later, like some traversal slashes and stuff, or the aforementioned big heavy finisher attacks and things. And you've also got the shields themselves, or the ability to guard with a two-handed weapon, either way. These are really important because a lot of the combat is based on parrying. You can block in order to reduce the damage you take, but you can also block at just the right time in order to parry a strike, which will sort of momentarily stun the enemy, allowing you to get in some free hits. And I say the combat is based around this for two big reasons. One, enemies do a lot of damage to you when they hit you. Even when you have extra health from level ups and from food and stuff, you still take a lot of damage from enemies. You can't sit there and tank enemies for very long. But also, there's the fact that there are some enemies that attack you too aggressively for you to normally get in strikes. If you're just trading blows with them, you'll lose. You have to actually parry them in order to make them step back for a second and give you an opening. There are, of course, also ranged weapons that you can find and craft, some bows and things of that nature, as well as some magic stuff. You can find wands, which do have some elemental damage types, which can be really handy against the specific enemy types that are weak to them. And you can also find staves, and these work a little bit differently. Wands just have infinite sort of ammo. They don't use a resource. You can just blast them all around the place, and the only limiting factor is their relatively low amount of durability. However, staves do not just shoot stuff by default. Instead, they actually take spells, and you load the staff up with these spells and shoot those, but the spells are limited. So if you have fireballs, you don't just have a fireball spell, you have, say, 30 fireball 1 spells, and then you can actually use those up like a consumable. But eventually, if you explore in certain areas, especially in certain tombs and things, you can find eternal spells, which actually last forever. You only need the one, and they don't get consumed. Durability is a really important consideration in this game because your tools and weapons and stuff do lose durability quite quickly, like surprisingly fast. I actually recommend having multiple weapons on you if you're going into a combat area, because chances are just one of them is probably going to break before you actually get through all the enemies. Now, this is helped by, it's not as annoying as it sounds, because for one, weapons that break do not disappear. You can still repair them. They don't leave your inventory as soon as they break or anything. But two, all you have to do is go back to a workbench and it will automatically repair all of your equipped stuff, all of your held stuff, and it's free. It doesn't cost any resources or materials or anything. You just have to go back to one of these benches and it will auto repair everything. You can also sometimes, while you're exploring, especially in dungeons and stuff, find these gigantic anvils. And by gigantic, I mean they usually have a full human skeleton laying on them, like a bed. They're really big. Those will also repair everything for free. So the fact that your weapons and stuff kind of break easily is not as annoying as I thought it would be, because they don't disappear and because repairing them is free. Another thing to note, by the way, is the building system is really good in this game. You don't build straight from resources. Like, you don't chop down trees to get wood and then use that wood to build. Instead, you chop down trees to get wood, use that wood to make building blocks, and then place those blocks in various forms in order to actually build. So you can only build with the materials that you have in your inventory, the blocks of materials that you've made at workbenches, but they're easy to make. And the building system has a whole bunch of different sized components that you can use, from like 1x1 foundations or 2x2 walls and things like that. And there's quite a lot of variety in terms of the different modules that you can pick. And then once you have a module picked, you just scroll through the list of building block materials that you have on your person at that time, and you can build them in that material however you want. So you can have a bunch of materials on you, and you can just switch between them on the fly while you're building to build a more varied looking base. But arguably the coolest part about the building system is the fact that there are 1x1 little blocks. So it's like a fully voxel-based building system. This means that if you want to, you can actually just build little teeny bits of structure at a time and make anything shaped however you want. So you're not limited by large modules. You can use large modules to save time, but if you want to make something really detailed and carefully crafted, you can. You can build everything out block by block. Like, for instance, when I was building a stone bridge from my base, I wanted to build like a sort of two-tiered wooden building that connected to sort of a stone tower. And I wanted a bridge in between them, and I noticed that there wasn't really like a bridge support module to build, so instead I just built it myself, just went one block at a time and built like a little archway to connect the bridge legs with each other, and it looks pretty good, I think, actually, because it was just a simple block by block piece of building rather than a full module. This means I can make it look however I wanted. And because there's a lot of different materials you can build walls and foundations and stuff from, there's quite a lot of visual variety with the building, and you can also do some other kind of odd things just to see what it looks like. Like, for instance, I ended up building a sort of hybrid material area that had half height walls of stone and half height walls of wood, so that they're like hybrid timbered stone walls, just because I thought it might look kind of cool. And it does. I think it looks pretty good. So it's cool that there's this much flexibility in the building system. There's also a lot of decoration that you can put around. So tables, chairs, benches, all kinds of stuff like that. And these are cool because, for one, they're obviously for role-playing, right? You want your house to look in a really specific way, or you want one of your NPCs' places to be decorated in a really specific way. You can do that with all these various bits of decoration that you can find and craft. But they also do have actual gameplay benefits, because you have a comfort level in your house. And when you are sheltered, meaning you have like full walls and stuff around you, and you are warm by like a fire or a fireplace or something like that, you will actually start building up this well-rested buff that you definitely want. And you build it up by default at 5 minutes. 5 minutes is the sort of base duration that you can build up to. And the well-rested will make your stamina gauge a lot bigger. This is a huge deal because you use stamina for just about everything, so this allows you to actually get more than one stamina gauge. But the cool thing is, the comfort level of your house improves the number of minutes that you can build up on this buff by 1 for each level of comfort. So if you've got a level 15 comfort in your house, you can have a 20-minute long buff. So you actually do want to decorate your house, even if not for roleplay, because there is an actual gameplay benefit for doing so. And in this case, it allows you to actually go out into the world and do your exploration stuff with much more stamina than you would normally have because of this well-rested buff. So what about the early access? What is currently in need of work? How's the general state of it? Well, so far, I think it's pretty polished, actually. I haven't run into any major game-breaking stuff or general instability. It has never crashed on me, and it runs quite well despite looking very pretty. This is something I haven't actually mentioned for some reason. It's a really good-looking game. It's very pretty. It's got really nice uses of odd colors to denote danger, like the Shroud and stuff like that, and some really good atmosphere when it comes to exploring dungeons and tombs and the shrouded areas and things. There's a really good sense of sort of wanderlust that the game gives you, and even just exploring around in the very pretty general outdoor environments is nice, because the music and the ambient sound matches really well to give you a good sense of sort of exploratory atmosphere. So it's definitely a good looking game, and I'm impressed by how good it runs despite looking so good. And in fact, it even runs pretty well on the Steam Deck, which I was surprised by. But I have noticed some minor bugs. Probably the most recurring bug for me they've all been like AI related bugs, where the enemies will do strange things for a while. Sometimes they'll kind of run in place instead of coming at you. Sometimes they get stuck in the terrain, like stuck in hills. And for some reason, whenever this happens, they actually like refuse to die. You can deplete their health, but they won't actually die, and they'll still sort of try and get to you, but they can't because they're stuck in the terrain. It's actually a relatively common problem, having enemies and animals and stuff getting stuck, so that definitely needs to be fixed. I've also noticed that it can be deceptively easy to kind of cheese bosses by breaking their AI. Sometimes it's easy to find the border that a boss will not cross, like they'll refuse to walk any further, and just kind of skirt that border to keep them aggroed on you, but then keep them also turning around because you're going beyond the border and just sort of get a bunch of free hits in. It's something that you can do if you feel like it, and I think that maybe it needs to be fixed a little bit. I think it's probably going to be not too difficult to fix because there are several bosses that do not do this. There are several bosses that will basically chase you forever if you keep aggroing them, and they don't allow you to cheese them like this. So I think there's just a couple here and there that maybe their awareness of the terrain and stuff could use a little bit of tuning up. But aside from some kind of occasional AI hiccups, I think the rest of the game is actually working in quite a good state right now, and there's a reason that it's actually pretty well reviewed on Steam at the moment, because oftentimes people can be very harsh on survival games in particular when they release on Steam in early access. It's pretty common to see like mixed reviews for a launch version of a game like this, but this one is very positive, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. So we've got some beautiful visuals and really good world exploration, some pretty fun action-y combat, and really good loot variety and build variety for your characters, and of course 16-player co-op. You can play with 15 other people if you wish, so you can have a pretty big server world with a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, this is definitely one to keep an eye on. I would say if you're at all interested in it, it's probably safe for you to pull the trigger because there's already a lot to do and it's well polished, and it's clear that they're going to be working quite hard to continue to add stuff to it. And I'm excited to see where it goes from here because I want to see more of the world and maybe some more varied terrain types and interesting enemy types and stuff, because of what's here is already so good that I have a feeling whatever they have in store for updates and stuff later down the line is probably going to be really interesting. So yeah, this is a very good action RPG survival hybrid, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.